Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that this Assembly notes that the 25th of December 2024 marks the 50th anniversary of Cyclone Tracy, which so devastated Darwin and the surrounding areas at Christmas 1974, leading to the loss of 66 lives as well as countless homes and businesses. Acknowledges the significant response provided by so many of the Northern Territory community, including healthcare workers, emergency services personnel, Darwin residents and the people of our other towns and cities in the Northern Territory who work tirelessly to assist those directly impacted. Notes the contribution of members of the First Legislative Assembly of the Northern Territory for the role they played in the reconstruction of Darwin after Cyclone Tracy, and celebrates the vibrant, diverse and resilient community Darwin has become over the last 50 years. Madam Speaker, today is really a defining... God, this is driving me crazy. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Have a water jug now. It's all going to be okay. Small wins. Today, Madam Speaker, we remember a defining moment in the history of the Northern Territory. This is a story of devastation, survival, heartbreak, but most importantly, resilience. It has been 50 years since Cyclone Tracy struck Darwin in the early hours of Christmas Day in 1974. Cyclone Tracy was unlike anything Australians had ever seen before. Wind gusts recorded over 217 kilometres per hour before the instruments failed. There was torrential rain, storm surges, and it tore through Darwin, leaving our city unrecognisable. While we acknowledge the profound impact of that day, 66 lives were tragically lost and our city left in ruins. We also reflect on the determination of the people of Darwin and the incredible efforts that transformed devastation into renewal. Today is a time to honour both what was lost and what was rebuilt. Christmas is meant to be a time of joy spent with family and loved ones, but Christmas Eve in 1974 in Darwin was different. The winds were building, the sky was darkening, and the thick sense of unease was settling in across the city. By the early hours of Christmas Day, when Santa should have been visiting, a Category 4 cyclone struck our city. For those who lived through it, the memories are vivid. Many describe the roar of the wind as sounding like a freight train passing through their living rooms. Others have spoken of walls shuddering, roofs flying, and water surging into their homes. Survivors huddled in bathtubs, under tables and in cupboards, clinging to one another as their world collapsed around them. Tragically, 66 lives were lost: mothers, fathers, children, friends, family and neighbours. Thousands were injured and tens of thousands were left homeless. The cyclone destroyed more than 70% of Darwin's buildings and essential infrastructure, leaving the city without power, water or sanitation. In the hours that followed, the full scale of destruction became clear. Homes were reduced to rubble, cars and trees had been tossed like unwanted toys, and in every face there was a shock, a collective grief for what had been lost and uncertainty about what lay ahead. Despite the devastation, the spirit of Darwin was unbroken. Neighbours became each other's lifelines, sharing what little food and shelter remained. Volunteers and emergency workers arrived, bringing supplies, expertise and compassion. The scale of the evacuation that followed was unprecedented in Australia's history. Over 36,000 people were airlifted to safety, many with nothing more than the clothes on their backs. Cities across the nation opened their doors to the people of Darwin, providing shelter, food and comfort. The national response was extraordinary. Australians donated generously, money, clothes, even homes to house families. Red Cross teams worked tirelessly. The military set up temporary medical facilities and shelters. And as news of the disaster spread, the phrase, "We are all Territorians," resonated across the country. In the wake of the destruction, it would have been easy to walk away and declare Darwin lost. But that's not who we are. Instead, those who stayed chose to rebuild, not just to restore what was lost, but to create something even better. The Darwin Reconstruction Commission, established by Prime Minister Gough Whitlam in the early 1975, undertook an enormous challenge. With a mandate to rebuild the city within 5 years, they accomplished it in just over 3. This was no simple reconstruction. Roads, schools and hospitals were rebuilt from the ground up. New homes were designed to withstand future cyclones, with roofs tied to foundations and walls reinforced to protect against flying debris. The city's port and airport were modernised, ensuring Darwin could once again serve as a vital hub for trade and transportation. And with the enormous rebuild came an influx of new Territorians, those who came to help and never left. In 1978, Darwin's population had returned to pre-Tracy levels, but more than that, Darwin had been transformed into a city designed for the future, a symbol of resilience and determination. Cyclone Tracy taught us many lessons, and its legacy continues to shape our lives today. The building codes introduced after 1974 have become a national standard, ensuring homes and businesses across Australia are better prepared to withstand natural disasters. When cyclones Laurie and Yassi, both stronger than Tracy, struck Queensland in the 2000s, these codes saved countless lives. This is a direct legacy of the work done here in Darwin, a gift of resilience to our entire nation. Tracy also taught us the importance of preparedness, of community spirit, and the need to look out for one another in times of crisis. These lessons remain at the heart of Darwin's identity today. Today, Darwin is a city transformed. From a population of around 45,000 before the cyclone, we are now home to more than 140,000 people. Our city has become a vibrant, diverse and innovative hub, a gateway to Asia, a leader in tourism and industry, and a place that welcomes all who come here. Our skyline is dotted with modern buildings that stand as a testament to our resilience. Our cultural festivals, art galleries and thriving markets showcase a rich heritage shaped by many cultures. And while we remember the devastation of Tracy, we also celebrate how far we have come. Darwin is no longer defined by Cyclone Tracy. It is defined by its people, its spirit and its vision for the future. Madam Speaker, as we mark the 50th anniversary of Cyclone Tracy, let us take a moment to reflect. We honour those we lost, we pay tribute to those who rebuilt, including the first Legislative Assembly of the Northern Territory and those members who just 1 month into their term had to deal with a town in devastation and its people dispersed across the country. And we celebrate the spirit of a city that refused to be defeated. Darwin is not just a place, it is a story of resilience, courage and community. Darwin is also a feeling of belonging. 50 years ago, Cyclone Tracy tested us in ways we could never have imagined. And we proved that together we are stronger than any cyclone or disaster. Let us carry that spirit forward, ensuring that Darwin remains a city of opportunity, resilient, and that there is hope for future generations to come. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Chief Minister for bringing this important motion before the House today. We know and understand the great significance and the weight of the discussion through this motion, Madam Speaker, and it is especially heavy for the survivors of Cyclone Tracy and their families who have lived experience of this very traumatic event that not only shook the foundations of their lives, their families, homes and community, but indeed the broader Northern Territory and the broader Australia. Madam Speaker, this year, as we know, will mark the 50th year anniversary of on the 25th of December of an event that changed the face of Darwin and our beloved Northern Territory forever. In the early hours of Christmas morning 1974, Darwin was struck by one of the most powerful cyclones in Australian history. Cyclone Tracy tore through our city, the winds that exceeded 217 kilometres per hour and left absolute destruction in its wake. 66 lives were lost, thousands were injured, and over 36,000 people were left homeless in a city of just over 47,000. Madam Speaker, Darwin and the surrounding area were unrecognisable and has truly been forever changed since that day 50 years ago. Cyclone Tracy swept through the city with unprecedented force, bringing destruction that was as swift as it was overwhelming, with 80% of the city being devastated. 80%. Madam Speaker, at the time, Cyclone Tracy and the residents of Darwin, whether it was our original residents, the Larrakia people, and the multitude of multicultural new Territorians, each of them found themselves living in and around Darwin for different reasons and affected all by the same event. For the 47,000 residents of Darwin, this was a catastrophic event unlike anything anyone had experienced before. Cyclone Tracy did not discriminate. Its winds flattened homes, uprooted trees, and turned lives upside down. For many Larrakia residents whose families have lived on this land for countless generations, the loss went beyond homes and belongings. It also disrupted cultural practices, songlines, sacred sites access, and community connections that had endured for millennia. The Darwin streets were filled with debris, homes were flattened, and lives were shattered, Madam Speaker. There was no running water, no sanitation, no electricity, little shelter, and a high risk of disease outbreaks. The physical devastation was staggering, but the emotional toll ran even deeper. However, Madam Speaker, amid the chaos, stories of courage, compassion, and community emerged. We know some of them very well today, and that spirit lives on. Madam Speaker, neighbours became lifelines, strangers became friends, and the spirit of humanity shone brightly in those very dark days. Families shared shelter, food, and comfort. The selflessness of so many ensured that even in the face of overwhelming loss, there was hope. The response from across the country was extraordinary. Supplies, medical aid, volunteers poured into Darwin. Communities rallied, and the nation stood with the Northern Territory in solidarity. It was a powerful reminder that in those times of crisis, we are stronger when we are together. The years that followed Cyclone Tracy were a testament to the resilience of the Darwin people and the broader Northern Territory community. Rebuilding a city is not an easy task, and from near total destruction was not something that was taken lightly. Homes, schools, businesses, all had to be reconstructed and start fresh. New safety measures and building codes, as the Chief Minister has outlined, were introduced to ensure that such devastation would never happen again, and not just here in the Territory, but across Australia. Today, our beautiful capital city, Darwin, stands as vibrant and as a modern city that we can be very proud of. And it is because of this determination and ingenuity of the people back then, 50 years ago, that we get to enjoy this wonderful city. Cyclone Tracy reshaped Darwin, not just physically, Madam Speaker, but emotionally, culturally and spiritually, leaving behind a legacy of resilience and renewal and a fresh sense of hope for the future of the Territory. As we commemorate this very important 50th anniversary, we also honour those that were lost. Their memories live on in the hearts, and the memories live on in the hearts of the families, friends, neighbours, colleagues, and their stories that our Territory survivors can continue to share across our community. This anniversary is not just about remembering a disaster, it's about celebrating community spirit, a Territory that refused to be defined by tragedy and crisis. It is about learning from the past, honouring those who came before us, and carrying that strength into our future. Cyclone Tracy taught us many lessons about the power of nature, the importance of preparedness, and the strength of the Northern Territory's community spirit. Madam Speaker, as we face new challenges in an era of changing climates, these lessons remain as relevant as ever. They remind us to respect the environment, to plan for resilience, and to cherish the bonds that unite us all, especially in those moments and times of natural disasters. Today, through this motion, we reflect on nearly the 50-year anniversary of Cyclone Tracy. So let us honour that past, embrace our present, and look forward to a better future defined by unity today. Let us remember that even in our darkest moments, Territorians are always capable of extraordinary resilience. Darwin is a city with a strong history, Madam Speaker, and our Labor opposition believe a strong future. For time immemorial, the Larrakia people have lived here on this beautiful country. Darwin took the brunt of the attacks of Australia during the Second World War, which we commemorate each year, the bombing of Darwin on the 19th of February. Madam Speaker, the most infamous period which we know shaped Darwin and the territory which we live today is also considered to be Cyclone Tracy. We can look at this city and the surrounding area as a testament to the power of community coming together to rebuild what was lost. May we continue to honour the legacy of Cyclone Tracy, those who were lost, those who survived, and those hard lessons that it taught the territory for many years to come. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Brennan, the Attorney-General.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On Christmas Day of 1974, Darwin and the Northern Territory changed forever. A song released in 1975 by Bill and Boyd described it best, and I remember being in primary school singing this song at our Christmas concert. My fellow students and I weren't yet born during Cyclone Tracy, but as we sang, we watched an audience of parents who wept as they listened. I remember that concert vividly, as in the audience were my parents who lived through that awful night. Madam Speaker, with your indulgence, I'd like to read the words of that song for the Hansard records.
Could you sing it for us?
No, thank you. I might leave that to my colleague, the member for Port Darwin, to do the singing.
Apologies for interrupting. Please continue.
Thank you. On Christmas Eve of 74, the warning sounded out. For all the broadcast stations, a great storm was near about. The boys and girls asleep in bed, tomorrow was the day. Their mums and dads all prayed the mighty storm would turn away. Christmas morning was a nightmare as Cyclone Tracy struck. It ripped apart the buildings like an atom bomb had struck. It twisted iron girders and it flattened all the trees. The might of such a cyclone must be seen to be believed. Many boats put out to sea, very few returned. Most were foundered on the rocks or in deep seas overturned. Australia was shocked and saddened as the news came through. A devastated city must be built anew. That suffering and heartbreak could happen in this way. A natural disaster could come on Christmas Day. Santa never made it into Darwin. Disaster struck at dawn on Christmas Day. Santa never made it into Darwin. A big wind came and blew the town away. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The population of Darwin was 47,000 in 1974. So with 71 lives lost, 650 people injured and more than 5,000 homes destroyed, it's no wonder so many Territorians are now sharing their stories as part of this year's 50th year of remembering Cyclone Tracy. When my mum heard the Darwin Museum and Art Gallery was pulling together cyclone survivor stories, she went in and was interviewed by Gerard Archibald. I asked her to help me share her story for this motion in the Parliament. My mum and dad lived at the Bindaree Caravan Park in Berrima. Dad was from North Queensland, so knew that while in Darwin, tropical storms and cyclones meant that they should be sure that their caravan was held down with ropes and star pickets well before the wet season. And it turns out that was a very wise move. On the 3rd of December 1974, there was a warning that Cyclone Selma was on the way, and so many workers came home early that day to prepare their properties. Mum explained that there was a little bit of rain, but the main winds didn't affect Darwin, much to their relief. Then, on the 24th of December 1974, a new warning of the approaching Cyclone Tracy. My dad was working on the other side of Darwin Harbour and he ventured back to the caravan park again to prepare. He travelled on very rough seas back to Darwin that afternoon. When he got home, Mum and Dad packed away their Christmas tree and stowed everything else that they had loose around the place in the back of their car. After dinner, they went to sleep, thinking that Tracy would be similar to Selma, but they were prepared nonetheless. As the winds got stronger, they woke up and they went around to all of the other people in the caravan park, knocking on their doors, waking them up and getting everybody to go into the safety of the ablution block. Mum was sitting in a shower cubicle with others, including a 10-month-old baby boy. At midnight, it was definitely not safe to go outside. Some people were holding the main door closed to stop the wind blowing into the concrete block. At about 3 a.m, the wind stopped and they took a peek outside and were alarmed at the mess the trees made, and all the clothes on the clotheslines were all mangled. And the silence was eerie. The sky was bright, and even though it was the dead of the night, it was so very bright. Not long after they heard what they recount as sounding like a train coming, quickly realised it was the sound of wind, so they raced back into the ablution block. The short break in the wind, of course, was the eye of the cyclone, and much to the credit of those at the caravan park, they knew this and they braced themselves for the next onslaught of wind and rain. Many in that ablution block were praying that the roof of the toilet block would not come off, but alas, it did. It came off with a frightening rip and a bang, and it was gone into the same direction as all the caravans. Everyone in that block was soaking wet, wearing just sleeping attire. Some of them had a raincoat on. I know my mum was wearing a raincoat. The little baby was still in his mother's arms and he was wrapped in a big blanket. There were men standing under the huge beam that was threatening to come down on top of them as it jiggled across from one wall to another. By 6 a.m, the wind had subsided enough for everyone to venture outside, and to their shock and amazement, they could see miles away over to the Coonawarra Naval Base because all of the trees and infrastructure was gone. There was no way of communicating with others, but some people used their cars to venture out to go and see their friends. And they came back to the caravan park with horror stories of the destruction. My mum's boss at the time from Darwin Foundries came by to check on her and said there were many babies without formula, and he was collecting any kind of milk products, and my parents were able to offer them some evaporated milk to feed the babies. The next visit they had was from the army, saying that one person from each family could be taken into town to make one phone call, and a bus collected people to go into town to get inoculations from typhoid and tetanus. They were also given fuel vouchers so they could drive out of town if they could, and I believe they were encouraged to. My mum and dad did drive out of town, and it took them weeks to drive to Innisfail, which is where they were from originally, and they stayed there for a few months before returning to Darwin. Darwin was home for them by then, and Dad had wanted to help rebuild Darwin after the cyclone, which he had done as a carpenter for decades beforehand. Madam Speaker, we know that Territorians rebuilt after Cyclone Tracy to be stronger and better equipped to deal with cyclones. And we know that the Territory spirit of community lives on after that terrible night. And it's one of the reasons so many people did return to Darwin post-cyclone. And we've had many cyclones since 1974. But I'm genuinely appreciative of the lessons learned during Tracy, and I pay tribute to those who didn't make it, but also to those who survived. We will never forget what Darwin went through for Christmas of 1974, and this year marks the 50th anniversary of Cyclone Tracy, and we will never forget them. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Catherine.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It gives me great pleasure to rise and put on the record some thoughts from a friend of mine. And so I'm going to read out a letter that, some comments that my girlfriends... I was talking to my girlfriend about, we were doing this motion for Cyclone Tracy today, with the memorial being 50 years this Christmas, and I knew that she lived in Darwin, and so Lisa has very willingly given me the story after we had a bit of a conversation about her mother and father and the 4 kids, stowing away throughout that storm. So this is Lil Polita's story, and in her words as she wrote it, Madam Speaker. We were moving house and had been cleaning the house before we took possession. The house looked lovely and fresh, and we moved in the night of Cyclone Tracy, Christmas Eve. I went shopping for Christmas and first heard about the Cyclone Tracy. My daughter had the same name. 2 women were speaking in the shops and I'd overheard them. When I got home, I asked my daughter if there was any news about the cyclone. She said, yes, it's all over the news on the TV. So we unpacked the groceries, the freezer was full, well frozen, and the turkey was left in the oven to defrost. The ham was in the fridge. After dinner, my husband Bob went to the Nightcliff Hotel and met up with friends, and I thought I should take some precautions. I wrapped the radio inside 2 pillows and lots of plastic, got all of the candles out and the torches. They were ready from a previous cyclone warning but didn't eventuate. Bob came home from the pub at 10 p.m. I have to just say here, Madam Speaker, if anyone, I'm not sure if the opposition leader knows Lisa Dawes' parents, Bob, from being around Catherine, but Bob loved to have a drink. And when I read through this of what Lil was talking about, I couldn't help thinking this is very typical of Bob to be at the pub when she's there on Christmas Eve. But probably, everyone's at the pub on Christmas Eve back then, Madam Speaker. He was saying the pub crowd said the cyclone was not going to hit. I did not believe him. He went off to bed as he had one too many beers in celebrating Christmas. The weather was building up, so I filled up the bathtub with water and got the children to get dressed and put their shoes on. I stowed away as much as I could in the cupboards as I thought that would be a safe space. It was quite scary as we had 4 children to worry about and was not sure what to expect. With knowing the member for Nelson's story and reading my girlfriend's story, Madam Speaker, it is one of those triggers, I think, in life that you remember.
Yeah.
The reports were more frequent in telling us what to do. We were in an elevated house in Rapid Creek with lots of trees. The wind was strong and the house felt like it was swaying. At midnight, Bob woke up and was sure we were going to be hit by the cyclone. We decided the safest place in the house was the passageway and pulled together the 2 mattresses to give us more support. The laundry tubs and washing machines were full of water, so we had plenty. With a large rumble and flash of lightning, the power went out. That's when it got really scary. We bunkered down and sat it out. 1 mattress on the ground, the other was on top of us all. The first thing to come through one of the bedrooms was a big tree branch. We could hear the louvers breaking and the wind was terrifying. And to this day, the sound of jets taking off reminds me of that night. The room at Mag NT, the Museum and Art Gallery, has a replication of that noise, and I could never go into it because it made me cry. We could see out the windows as we huddled and saw a caravan rolling by. There was so much lightning that we could see all going on outside like daylight. We prayed, we sang. My husband and I argued as I wanted to be down south for Christmas. The thing which makes it worse, Madam Speaker, is I know my girlfriend's parents who have both passed away, and it's very typical of them if you knew them. It was lovely to get to the eye of the storm, where we all got up, went to the bathroom, had a drink. I decided we needed to move further up the passageway for greater protection. All was okay downstairs, but the car got a bit of damage. The eye passed, and the ferocity of the cyclone was again with us. Prayer was a comfort, and my girlfriend says she remembers her mother. God, pull myself together, sorry. I can remember Lisa telling me this story as her mother sat there. As I can imagine, as a mother, hugging your children, not knowing what was next. Hugging them all so tight and singing loudly and praying. After a while, it was nice to see daylight and know we had survived. We got up, went outside as other neighbours were out there. It looked like a bomb had hit Darwin. There was some guy going from home to home to see if there were any casualties. Christmas Day, the children helped me build a fire. We had tea, lamingtons and mince pies. I then got the kids to work. We built another fire to start drying things out. I washed all of the clothes we found lying around and the sheets. I found the children's presents and we had turkey cooked on the open fire and tried to make Christmas as reasonable as we could, considering. Madam Speaker, that was the words of Lil, my girlfriend's mother. But I can imagine being in that storm as a mother, hugging your children, singing, praying, hoping that you were all going to come out alive. And I've been in the Mag NT where they had the replica of that, and the sound is horrifying. And as kids, we used to live here in Darwin, and we lived in Rapid Creek, where the member for Nelson used to live, and where my girlfriend's family lived. And we had moved down south the year before, thank God, because there wasn't much left of our house where we were either. So it's memories like this that bring back so many thoughts, a bit like the flood does for me as well. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Berkeley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to reflect on the significant impact Cyclone Tracy has had, influencing the fighting spirit and resilience that Territorians are made of. The moment Tracy struck down with such fury and force marked the beginning of a territory-wide emergency response all along the track, including across my electorate, the Berkeley. The Northern Territory Archives Service hold incredible oral history pieces that tell many tales of bravery, resilience and compassion. One such story I'd like to share is the first-hand account of Tennant Creek local Les Liddell, recounting the strength of community spirit that unfolded in Tennant Creek during the time of great need. In the wake of Tracy's fury, the service clubs of Tennant Creek, the Lions Club and Apex were called together to coordinate a relief effort. On Boxing Day morning at 9 a.m, Les and fellow service club members gathered at the CWA hall to quickly identify roles, determine what was needed and figure out how to get food and supplies to Darwin. At that point, communication was almost non-existent, making it incredibly difficult to coordinate or commit to any actions with certainty. Les and the good people of Tennant Creek didn't let that stop them. They took matters into their own hands and mounted a loudspeaker in the back of a ute, drove through the streets of Tennant Creek, letting everyone know about the meeting and urging them to contribute what they could. And the community of Tennant Creek came through. A registration division was set up to record evacuees' details, who they were, where they had come from, where they were headed, and even their registration numbers. The registration desk became the first port to help evacuees process what had happened to them, sharing their stories. Records indicate that the registration team ensured each person was given adequate time and empathy so they could tell their stories to the person at the registration desk. Once registered, people were directed to the CWA hall in Tennant Creek, where a hot meal was waiting for them. And here, Again, they shared their experiences with the cooks or the volunteers serving the meal. It was another opportunity for them to begin processing what they had been through. The third step was setting up a clothing distribution point at the Uniting Church, and finally, a billet allocation. Les and his mates again through the loudspeaker in the back of the ute and toured the town asking for volunteers to open their homes to those in need. Again, the community of Tennant Creek came through. Community members volunteering to billet would collect their guests at the Uniting Church Hall, take them home, feed them and provide a place to sleep for the night. The next morning, the evacuees were ready to continue their journey either south or east, thanks to the generosity of the community. Les Liddell goes on to tell a story about a man who arrived in Tennant Creek clad only in his pyjamas. He told Les that he was in such shock in Darwin that he'd just jumped in his car and drove. Catherine was too close to Darwin, so he kept going until he reached Tennant Creek, where he could finally pull over and feel safe again. Madam Speaker, the townsfolk of Tennant Creek certainly made them feel safe. As the evacuees continued to arrive in Tennant Creek, the community was faced with the immense challenge of continuing to provide food, shelter and support. The situation was critical and resources were stretched thin. Food was scarce. The wet season had already cut supplies from Mount Isa and Darwin. But in the midst of this chaos, something truly remarkable took place. Madam Speaker, the people of Warrabri, which we now know as Ali Kurung, stepped forward in a way that left an indelible mark on the community of Tennant Creek. Without being asked, without any outside direction, the Warrabri people went into their fields, harvested watermelons and rock melons and delivered a truckload of fresh fruit to Tennant Creek. This was no small gesture. It was a powerful act of kindness. They brought a whole truckload of fresh food with a simple yet profound message. There you are, you need food for the people, here it is. This act of kindness deserves to be remembered. It may not have been widely recorded in our history, but the generosity of the people of Warrabri, now known as Ali Kurung, helping their fellow Territorians in the time of need speaks volumes. I'm proud to share Les's story as it does embody the spirit of the Barkly and the Territory more broadly. Les's story talks to the true meaning of community and compassion and what it means to stand together in times of crisis. As we continue to reflect on these difficult days, let us not forget the quiet heroes who rose to the occasion in their own way, ensuring that no one went without the face of disaster. Madam Speaker, just on the weekend I was talking with local Tennant Creek resident Roddy Calvert, who is a life member of the CWA in the Northern Territory. And she presented me with this booklet put together by the CWA, which records a number of stories by Tennant Creek residents who were either in Darwin during the cyclone or who helped out in Tennant Creek during the time of need. I do want to thank Roddy Calvert and Helen Kemp for the incredible amount of work that they put into putting this book together. Madam Speaker, I seek to table that book so it's on the parliamentary record.
Is leave granted? Okay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In closing, Cyclone Tracy may have torn down the town, but she was quite possibly the catalyst for the growth of the heart, spirit and resilience that Territorians are made of. In closing, thank you, Roddy, thank you, Helen, thank you to all of the people of Tennant Creek for the incredible support they provided at a time of need. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Breitling.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I myself was not even born when Cyclone Tracy hit Darwin, but the stories of survival and resilience that we have heard here this morning fill me with immense pride at the way in which Territorians came together in a time of need. It's what I believe what being Territorian or Territory tough is all about. Recently in Alice Springs, a group of people who were in Alice Springs when some of the first survivors of Cyclone Tracy arrived, making their way south. Those people recounted their tales and what they saw during that time. Former Mayor Damien Ryan spoke of seeing people in bathers and pyjamas as they stood in the opening of the first plane that had made its way from Darwin south. Many of them only had the clothes on their back, and some still had glass in their feet that needed to be seen to. Former Canellan Airways pilot David Fredo Fredrickson and his colleague at the time, John Myers, recounted how they flew a DC-3 aeroplane from Darwin to Alice Springs. The two pilots reminisced about how the Alice Springs airport was packed when they landed in town. Dozens had turned up early in the hours of the morning to try and help out those that were on board. Miss Franca Fredrickson spoke about how the Alice Springs community rallied together and raised money for those affected in the top end. From a population of 20,000 in Alice Springs at the time, the town raised some $250,000 in cash and in-kind support. Not bad for a little town, Miss Franca Fredrickson recounts. This once again is something that shows what is still true to this day, that when those in our community are in need, our community rallies around to support them. I want to pay tribute to all those that assisted, supporting those who found themselves without a home after Cyclone Tracy and came together to rebuild the Northern Territory. The strength of a community isn't measured on how we react when everything is going along fine, but how our community reacts when the chips are down, and as a community, as a people, we are tested. The Northern Territory has faced its share of tests over the years, but we are still here and we will continue to support our community through the challenges we face and into the future. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Wanguri.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise today to bring my contribution to the motion of recognising that on the 25th of December this year will be the 50th anniversary of the devastation of Cyclone Tracy in Darwin. My own parents, Amos and Casuarina Helwan, with my older siblings and other family members, went through this cyclone and were extremely lucky to have survived. They lived in our Housing Commission home at 9 Vorton Place in Rapper Creek, and in fact, at the time, my mother was 4 months pregnant with myself. I know this year commemorating this devastation has been controversial for many who are survivors, but I want to see is that true Territory spirit and resilience come through and take a moment to reflect on what happened that night. Darwin had been through major cyclones before, in January 1897 and again in March 1937. Darwin had also seen the devastation of the bombing of Darwin in 1942 and however rebuilt. Madam Speaker, on the eve of Christmas that year was also the eve of one of my brother's older brother, Simon Williams' 23rd birthday. I spoke to him recently and he recalls that night being one that he'll never forget. He told me that our dad and mum were preparing for the cyclone to arrive as they went to the shops on that Christmas Eve and bought biscuits, rice and other food items. These were not your normal Christmas food goods, but food that would be able to sustain their family if the cyclone did cross. My brother went on to tell me that all the reports were saying that the cyclone was moving away, but our dad had an instinct and left work early to get all his children to return home. Madam Speaker, my parents had no phone at home and there were no mobile phones back then. Dad drove to each of his adult children's workplace or their house to tell them all to come home to our Rapper Creek home. My older sisters ignored the request, but my brothers took up the offer. My brother remembers that Dad had just bought a new Holden Kingswood station wagon and that their other brother, Trevor, had also bought a new car. Our dad's beloved new car was wrecked during the cyclone, but the insurance paid out and lucky enough he got a new one. My brother recalls the neighbour's roof blew off and only scratched his old bomb of a car. He was quite disappointed. Madam Speaker, as a cyclone backtracked and hit land, my parents and siblings huddled in their tiny bathroom and survived. The rain and wind outside was scary, and reports say that Tracy's centre crossed the coast near Fannie Bay with the highest record gust winds of 217 kilometres per hour recorded around 3:05 a.m. at Darwin Airport. Apparently the wind speed instrument failed at around 3:10, with the wind vane destroyed after the cyclone eye passed over. My brother recalls losing his beloved guitar as he got smashed, and for those who know him, guitars and singing are his life to this very day. He said the neighbour's house was decimated, but ours was okay. My brother could not return to their own homes as they were decimated, so they came back to live with my parents. He says fondly that our dad was smart. He prepared for the worst, and that afternoon had filled 44-gallon drums with water, and as I said earlier, bought a lot of dry goods. For those who remember and who were in the chamber when I made my maiden speech, I spoke of my father's previous ordeals of surviving the bombing of Darwin in 1942 and drifting in the Indian Ocean after a torpedo sunk his Navy ship in 1944. These two previous incidents made my dad resilient to disasters, learned never to become complacent, and preparation was always the key to survival. On Christmas Day, my brother said he woke up to his 23rd birthday he would never forget. The family went to check on my sisters who were staying out at Humpty Doo and found one of my brother-in-laws, who was a chain smoker, had tried to prepare for the cyclone and bought as many cartons of smokes he possibly could, but forgot to buy matches or a lighter, so found him sitting on all the smokes. And I mean literally sitting on them as he tried to protect them during the cyclone. Madam Speaker, we had family at Berry Springs, the Gardner family, who housed everyone there for months, including their own large family and the Madgett family. Because of that, we were not evacuated, and many others had. My brother's boss wanted him to be closer to work, so he bought a caravan for him to live on site, and he moved into that for some time. He worked for Lawrence and Hanson, so they were extremely busy after the cyclone, filling government and private business wholesale electrical part sales. Madam Speaker, 66 people lost their lives during Cyclone Tracy, and it destroyed about 80% of Darwin City, and about 94% of the housing was uninhabitable. My father was working at Darwin City Council at the time, and his boss asked him if he knew anyone who wanted to work and help with the clean-up. He had a number of mates looking for work and got them work on the council. At that time, my mother was working for the Surimis at the chicken farm in Inghams, and they used to drive out there every day and drop food supplies to some illegal immigrants that were hiding in the Hume pipes that worked at Burno Brothers. There are a number of Indonesians who were in those pipes, and so they became friends, and that's how my dad got them work on the council, and they all became Australian citizens. It was a huge job to clean up after the cyclone. The cyclone also brought many government workers here to Darwin to help with the rebuild, and many remain here and are still here today. And many of those workers live in my electorate, as we all know that the northern suburbs was growing after the cyclone. Madam Speaker, for some of the devastation that brought with the cyclone on the 25th of December 1974, it is to be noted as upsetting, with the loss of lives that night, and we should recognise that. What the cyclone also taught us after that disaster was that we as Territorians will back each other and band together to rebuild. This is why I'm proud to call myself a true Territorian and part of the post-era Cyclone Tracy. Madam Speaker, thank you, and to the other members here today on commemorating a time in history that placed our Darwin on the map.
Member for Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. There are moments in time and events that define who we are and what we stand for. Sometimes these events are tragic, bringing a loss of life and possessions. And yet, from such tragedies, a profound sense of community emerges, bringing out the best of all of us. December 24, 1974, in Darwin was one such defining event. Cyclone Tracy was expected to travel harmlessly down the coast, took an abrupt turn on Christmas Eve, and made direct landfall over Darwin. The wind gusts reached 217 kilometres an hour before the instruments were destroyed. The gale force winds extended some 40 kilometres from the cyclone centre, leaving no part of Darwin or its rural area untouched. My family, like other families in Darwin, has a personal story of survival. My father, who was a police officer at the time, my mother, balanced part-time work looking after me, my brother. This is very tough. We lived at Perry Place in Rabbit Creek. I was 4 years old and my brother was 15 months older. We had a weekender at Howard Springs, a place we loved. A few weeks before Christmas Eve, another cyclone passed without incident. When Cyclone Tracy was announced, people in Darwin, I don't think, take it really seriously, and remember, communication was poor at that time. My father told me that most locals didn't really take shelter. Instead, they were at Christmas Eve parties, pubs and clubs, out celebrating Christmas Eve in typical Darwin fashion. At the time, Darwin was a public service town, a melting pot of nationalities where people often relied upon each other for support, especially since many families lacked extended networks of grandparents, uncles and aunts. For us, we were fortunate. Do you hear my uncle Kevin? Auntie Joyce, Fiona and Stephen, my cousins living with us when Cyclone Tracy struck. My parents decided at about 9 o'clock on that night that we should leave our house in Rabbit Creek and go to our house at Howard Springs. A decision that saved our lives. My father said to me, my main concern was, where's Santa Claus? How's he going to find us at our new house? And Dad said, it's okay, son, I'll phone him. I was too young to fully understand what was happening. My memories are a mix of my personal memories and the family stories. That night, the storm began with heavy rain and howling wind, and we moved to our house at Howard Springs, a simple structure, a donga, built by my father and his friends, well before building codes and cyclone standards were around. As the storm intensified, my father moved us into one room. Rainwater began splashing our faces as the roof lifted up and down, and eventually gave way completely, flying completely upside down and landing in the paddock beside us. My father quickly moved us under the kitchen table, shielding my mother, my brother, with a mattress as bricks, and debris began flying around. I personally remember sitting under the table and the bricks were falling on top of it. The brick wall collapsed. When the worst of the initial storm passed, we crawled to our G60 four-wheel drive, and that became our shelter for the night. Lightning illuminated the destruction around us. The house was rubble and bricks. Our Christmas presents were strewn everywhere. Despite the devastation, my father joked about how a few more screws on the roof might have made a difference. During the eye of the cyclone, there was a silence, and my father retrieved some of our belongings, including a few Christmas presents. My brother and I played in the back of the car when the second half of the cyclone hit. Our horses had escaped their paddocks and were standing in the middle of the field with their noses to the ground and their backs to the wind. It was a remarkable display of instinct and survival. As the storm subsided at dawn, we drove back to our house at Berry Springs. The devastation along the way was shocking. The trees were stripped on every leaf. Most houses in Darwin were destroyed or severely damaged. Our house in Berry Creek was reduced just to floorboards, and the only part of was the toilet was still intact. Had we stayed there, likely we wouldn't have survived. This is my house up to the side. My Uncle Gavin and Fiona wasn't so lucky. When their house collapsed, Uncle Gavin yielded to Yoda, and debris struck him, cutting him severely and nearly cutting off Yoda's leg. They were evacuated to Sydney in critical condition, but thankfully Uncle Gavin survived. Fiona's leg was saved. In the aftermath, the sense of community in Darwin was extraordinary. People helped strangers without hesitation. My father spent the days assisting others, while my mother searched through the debris, looking for treasures like wedding photos. We couldn't find any. There's no photos of my brother and I when we were young. Eventually, my brother, my mother and I were evacuated to Sydney with nothing but the clothes on our backs. The generosity of people in Sydney and across Australia was overwhelming. We were taken to Red Cross shelters for clothing and welcomed to schools. Our classmates reenacted Christmas for my brother and I because we missed out on Christmas that year. After 6 months, we returned to the Northern Territory, settling into Katherine when we were reunited with my father. Darwin had changed forever. Building codes were introduced and new homes were designed, withstanding future cyclones. Cyclone Tracy wasn't the last challenge faced by my mother. Decades later, on the 17th of March in 2018, Cyclone Marcus struck Darwin. For a second time, my mother lost her house. Her resilience through both events stands as a testament to the strength of Territorians who build and endure no matter what the adversity. The bombs fallen during Cyclone Tracy remain unbroken, and those who endured cyclones share a unique connection forged by the nature of Mother Nature's fury. Cyclone Tracy taught us many lessons. It showed us how fragile life was and how quickly possessions can be lost, and how vital community and loved ones are in times of crisis get together. It revealed the best of humanity, the willingness to help, rebuild and endure. I'm told even prisoners from Fannie Bay were released to help with the clean-up, a testament to inherent goodness that can serve us in the most trying of circumstances. To those who lived through Cyclone Tracy, your stories are part of Darwin's legacy, and we honour the lives, those lost, and the resilience and survivors, and the efforts to rebuild the city to the thriving city it is today. Darwin, razed to the ground, now stands as a testament to the strength and the spirit of its people, a beacon of hope and humanity, determination and democracy on the doorstep of Asia. I commend this motion to the House. Thank you.
Member for Fannie Bay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today I rise to speak about the defining moment in our nation's history, Cyclone Tracy, which struck Darwin on Christmas Day 1974, forever changing the landscape of our northern capital and the lives of its residents. Before Tracy, Darwin was a growing city of about 47,000 people, filled with the promise of the future. It was a place where families gathered to celebrate Christmas, unaware of the devastation that was about to unfold. Despite warnings, many were unprepared, perhaps due to the recent false alarm of Cyclone Selma, or simply caught up in the festive spirit. Then, in the early hours of December 25th, Cyclone Tracy made landfall. Fannie Bay was significantly impacted by Cyclone Tracy, as it was near the area where the cyclone made landfall. Cyclone Tracy crossed the coast near Fannie Bay at around 3:30 a.m. on Christmas morning 1974. The cyclone brought devastating winds and storm surge to the area. Wind gusts reached up to 217 kilometres per hour before the measuring instruments were destroyed. There was a storm surge of 1.6 metres in Darwin's harbour, with an estimated 4 metres at Casuarina Beach. As Fannie Bay is a coastal suburb of Darwin, it experienced severe damage, similar to the rest of the city, and approximately 70% of houses suffered serious structural failure. The proximity to the cyclone's landfall point suggests that Fannie Bay may have been one of the first areas to feel the full force of the storm. Fannie Bay's role in the Cyclone Tracy event makes it an important site for remembering the cyclone's impact and studying the effects on Darwin's coastal areas. Tracy unleashed its fury on the unsuspecting city, and the destruction was catastrophic. Over 70% of Darwin's buildings were destroyed or severely damaged, including 80% of homes. The city's infrastructure was obliterated. Power, water, sanitation, and communications were all severed. The human toll was devastating. 66 lives were lost, 53 on land and 13 at sea. Many more were injured, with over 145 people seriously hurt and more than 500 suffering minor injuries. The sound of Cyclone Tracy was described as a roar, like a freight train, as it tore through the city, leaving nothing but Darwin dance floors, elevated floors with no roofs or walls. In the aftermath, Darwin faced an unprecedented crisis, with essential services destroyed and the risk of disease outbreaks looming. A mass evacuation was deemed necessary. More than 36,000 people were evacuated, reducing Darwin's population to just over 10,000. The Australian government, led by Prime Minister Gough Whitlam, declared the state of emergency and initiated one of the largest airlifts in Australia's history. Madam Speaker, in the Fannie Bay electorate, we are lucky to be home to a number of important locations that tell the story of Cyclone Tracy. We have the Museum and Art Gallery of the Northern Territory that has for many, many years been home to the Cyclone Tracy exhibition. We have the Northern Centre of Contemporary Art that has a current Cyclone Tracy exhibition by Dr. Andrew Belletti. Fannie Bay has Bundilla or Vesties Beach, and East Point Reserve, where a land-based memorial is going to be located. But from this destruction, Madam Speaker, arose a story of resilience and renewal. On February 28, 1975, the Darwin Reconstruction Commission was established, and by mid-1978, Darwin's population had returned to pre-cyclone levels. Importantly, we have learned much from what Cyclone Tracy has taught us. We have improved building codes. Tracy led to the introduction of more stringent building standards right across Australia, resulting in structures that are better equipped to withstand extreme weather events. These changes have made buildings more resilient, potentially reducing damage by up to 85% in the event of a similar cyclone. We have enhanced disaster management. The cyclone highlighted the need for improved emergency management processes, leading to increased public awareness and preparedness measures. This resulted in better warning systems, response strategies, and recovery efforts. Our engineering-based standards have improved. Cyclone Tracy demonstrated that buildings with engineering input into their design and construction performed considerably better. And this led to the incorporation of engineering principles in housing design and construction, improving overall resilience. There's ongoing research and analysis. The disaster sparked continuous research into wind engineering and building performance during extreme events. Regular reanalysis of design and wind speeds in cyclone-prone regions, using up-to-date information and techniques, continues to improve our understanding and preparedness. Community resilience. The experience of Cyclone Tracy has changed how Australians handle disasters together, fostering a stronger sense of community support and the unity in the face of natural disasters. These lessons from Cyclone Tracy have saved lives in subsequent cyclones and continue to shape Australia's approach to disaster preparedness response. Madam Speaker, as we approach the 50th anniversary of this catastrophic event, we remember not only the devastation, but also the indomitable spirit of Territorians and all Australians who came together to help rebuild. Cyclone Tracy remains a powerful reminder of our vulnerability to nature's forces and our capacity for resilience in the face of adversity. Today, Darwin stands as a modern city, its buildings designed to endure the harsh climate of Northern Australia. It is a living testament to the human perseverance and ingenuity as we move forward. Let us carry the lessons of Cyclone Tracy with us, ensuring we remain prepared, resilient and united in the face of challenges. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Fong Lim.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you to everybody in the House for their very heartfelt reflections on Cyclone Tracy. My reflection is a very personal one. My family came to Australia originally in 1968 and then emigrated here permanently in 1971. My maternal grandparents, my mum, my aunt, and my uncle Nazmul, N-A-Z-M-U-L. And the reason I spell his name is because, as I'll tell his story, and as he recounted it to me the other day, he said, if you say anything, get my name spelled right, because on every one of those memorials it's spelled M-A-Z-N-U-L. And I said, all right, I'll see what I can do. Anyway, my family had all emigrated here, and for the first time since coming here after escaping war, they decided to make a return journey to Bangladesh to visit family. And so fortuitously, my maternal grandparents and my mum and aunt went off to Bangladesh for the Christmas of 1974, leaving behind my uncle Nazmul to hold the fort. A 17-year-old kid told to mow the lawn, look after the house, that it'd probably be fairly uneventful and, you know, all would be well. So he continued to go to work from their place in Nakara to the house, to work at Bunnings, as he used to do back in the day. And he was saying that he had no plans for Christmas Eve. And so a mate of his, Alan Morris, said to him, listen, there's a birthday party on. Let's all go to a birthday party that night. And because they were young and cavalier and didn't particularly know what cyclone warnings were about, thought that sounded like a reasonably good idea. And so they headed off to what was then the Berrima Tavern, now the Hidden Valley Tavern, for a birthday do. And all through the night, cyclone warnings kept coming through and they continued to not take them particularly seriously until events finally wrapped up around midnight and the wind was starting to howl. And then he recalls the story of them both being in a car, driving back towards Casuarina, back towards the house they had in Nakara, and suddenly discovering that the car was moving sideways and not forward on the trajectory that they had planned for it to be moving on. And the winds were so strong even at that time, bursts of them, that they were dragging them into the median strip. And that's when they got a sense that something serious was happening. And so through 1 a.m, through 2 a.m, the wind started to howl and everybody started to worry about the situation in a serious way. And a family of 6 of them, Alan Morris's family, kindly took my uncle in that night. They all huddled up together, initially in a bathroom, until that blew apart. at which point they all shifted into they were in the bathroom, and I remember him telling the story. He was like, we thought we were safe and secure in the bathroom, we had everything set up, and then the roof blew off. And so then we were sitting there literally watching the sky falling in from around us, around the four walls. So they had to evacuate from that bathroom. And then 6 of them ended up, at the end of it all 6 of them in a single toilet, holding the walls together all night, basically back to the wall, a la Star Wars, and trying to keep those walls from caving in on you. And he tells me it was a long night and a surreal one. And the presiding memory he has in terms of the audio landscape was of car horns going crazy, because houses were falling on cars and things were falling off, and there were just alarms and sirens going off all night long. Finally, at about 5 a.m. in the morning, my uncle recalls walking out with his erstwhile hosts onto the streets. And it was like an episode, he said, of one of those television shows where you walk out after an apocalypse and you wonder, are you the last people left on Earth? And everybody just slowly started creeping out at 5 a.m. in the morning. And it was still muggy, and it was still spitting with rain. And then suddenly you started to see small pockets of people coming out, all going, now what? They were quite proximate at the time to the area around Yingiya, that airport hotel. And so they decided en masse to all wander down to the airport hotel because that was the best bet that they had. And sure enough, a bit like in one of those episodes where you find other survivors, of some sort of apocalyptic fate, there were people standing at the door ready to welcome them with open arms, saying, come in, there's, food, shelter, Salvation Army doing their bit. And they ended up staying there for 3 days and 2 nights. And in amongst all of it, people forget that, of course, when disasters like this happen, there are all manner of secondary knock-on effects. And there was just mass outbreak of food poisoning at that time, which people forget. And at a time when there isn't a lot of sanitation, that's a real challenge. So other than trips to the old Darwin Hospital at Maley Point, there wasn't a lot of movement happening while everyone just tried to find their feet again. Eventually, of course, they made their way from the airport hotel to the actual airport, because by this stage, the dictate was out that able-bodied men should be sticking around to help rebuild, and younger people and anyone under 18 and women and children should be evacuating and getting on planes to go wherever they could go. My family had only arrived a few years ago. They didn't know anyone anywhere else. And my 17-year-old uncle certainly didn't know anyone in the rest of the country. So he sort of just arbitrarily picked Brisbane. And so before he knew it, he was on a plane to Brisbane, having vaguely heard somewhere in the past from my grandfather that we knew somebody in Brisbane. And before he had gotten on the plane, he'd wandered back to the house in Nakara. House was long gone. But he was able to identify it from the curtains. Somehow, some curtains had survived, and from those curtains, he was able to piece together a few bits of clothes. And so with, $50 in his pocket and some mismatched clothing and a curtain, he says, he made his way to Brisbane. Communication wasn't what it is now at that time, and so for a good period of time, my grandparents didn't actually know whether he was dead or alive, because they were on the other side of the planet. And my uncle was able to initially connect with a local refugee centre, of all things, in Brisbane, and then with a local mosque. And it was a reminder for me, actually, that there are so many people around Australia who contributed to helping Territorians out as well in the wake of the disaster. And we should be grateful for their contribution in that time as well. But yeah, my grandparents and my mum and aunt eventually did work out that my uncle was alive and in Brisbane. And so when they returned from Bangladesh, they went immediately to Brisbane and then wanted to come straight back to Darwin, but unfortunately had nothing to come back to, and so I had to detour via Canberra, which is why I have to keep confessing to be born in Canberra rather than in Darwin, which is probably how it should have been. But they eventually returned to Darwin for opportunity, and not least because this was a place that was willing to offer them a housing commission, a home, and great work, and an opportunity to rebuild and make a contribution enduringly and permanently. And that's certainly why my family came back here and stayed here for the long haul. It's wonderful to hear all the stories, and it is difficult to hear a lot of the stories of hardship at that time. I know it's a very triggering and traumatising event for a lot of people still 50 years later. But I would just say this as a small, little bit of hope and a glimmer to throw in there as well. My uncle's presiding recollection of the whole thing was of the strength and courage and good humour of a lot of Territorians who, having survived that night, all banded together to be like, well, that's probably not going to happen again then, is it? And I think, it's important to know that laconic wit and humour and Territorian character shone through at a time of crisis. And I hope that we will be prepared in future and resilient in the face of adversity again. And I'm grateful for the fact that we have a legislature that's 50 years old as well to try and ensure that we have that resilient community and the structures in place to be able to look after the Northern Territory should anything of that scale and size ever befall us again. But thank you very much for the opportunity to share that small anecdote, and thank you to everyone who has contributed today with anecdotes of their own in relation to Cyclone Tracy. Thank you. Madam Speaker.
Member for Mulka.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to acknowledge 50 years since Cyclone Tracy, and I'd also like to acknowledge the survivors of Cyclone Tracy. In 1974, I remember coming back home from a boarding school in Nulunbu, Udupuma College, remember being out to the bush with my family, dad and family, on country at Miringacha, on the edge of the eastern edge of the Arapura swamp. I had flown home for the holidays, and we were living in a paper bark hut at that time. Of course, every season we move around country from higher hills where we have bark huts, and then towards the swamp, an area we moved around to live on, created by paper bark huts. And some areas during the wet season, we go back onto higher hills and find shelters that we can live around, and that's how we have survived. Preparing our elders and leaders were all kind of knowing what to expect during those times. So at Miringacha at that time, the sky was clear, and it was on the Christmas Eve. The sky was clear, and weather had been sucked into Darwin towards the west. It was beautiful, dry weather, and it was a surprise to hear that a cyclone had hit Darwin. We were on the Christmas Day, we were working on the airstrips on the Christmas Day, and I turned our radio on because there was no phones, no communications. We had a little radio to listen to music while I was working, helping clearing up plain airstrips for a missionary to come over to bring in rations during that time. During the time people were hunting crocodiles and we were trading and all that. And so in that time, we were living there, and I turned the radio on to listen to music, and the ABC News came on to announce that Darwin had been flattened by a cyclone. And I turned around to my father and I said, Dad, Darwin's been flattened, because he used to walk, and a lot of people used to walk from Millingimby, Kalungo, go towards Darwin and back again, so they knew where the places were. They lived in Bagot, in those communities, and used to walk back and forward. And he knew. It was surprising to hear what had happened. So it was a shock for them and worried for all the people in Darwin. And at that time, I remember, just vaguely remember, that with that news later on, I turned the radio on again. There were 45 losses of lives, and it became really serious that we started to worry about people living from our communities, especially in Bagot and other areas. So later we heard there were had been family living in Darwin, and that was another worry that there was going to be a bad news coming from Darwin to our communities. But there was no communication, like I said, and so we were waiting to hear what had happened, and later we heard lots of people had stayed in Bagot. People told a story afterwards about how frightening it was. I heard the story of some time later, I heard a story of a fridge being found on the Wenali water tanks, and that told that's how powerful it was. And so sometime later, I drove along and went to past Wenali and saw the height of the water tower that is there now still. And they said that's where a bridge has been blown away from my house somewhere onto that hill. So that was really a serious matter. So my wife says her family were in Darwin at the hospital at Maley Point here. There were many women brought into Darwin to deliver babies when the cyclone hit. They were very frightened and didn't know what was going on and what was happening. Madam Speaker, when people lived in the bush, most of cyclones came through, and heavy storms were not seen as a threat, because often it brought good hunting places and places where we could be gathering food and stuff. It was, and we knew there was shelter close by, in like the caves and gaps between houses and places, and because the trees and the hills not as bulky and very big and dangerous like we see iron flying around now and bits of timber that is being built around here, which is life-threatening, or even cars that could be flying around, just debris of water, and so people used to know where we could go and shelter in strong weathers, animals. And So in there were not much debris that could fly around. Branches of trees that could fall on. People gathered wild honey from as it cracked, and berries and other stuff that we worked on. Like I said, it wasn't so hazardous like the cars and other heavy material. Before housing, we could find shelters in the rocks and stuff on earth. Branches that were falling beyond would expose like the honey, like I said. Today we need to make sure that we have safe shelters. When this happens, we need to be prepared as the ancestors were, and look after our communities. In remote communities, we need to have appropriate shelters where we permanently stay now, and preparations that includes our community leaders for storm surges and cyclones. In places like Nhulunbuy, we need BOM, or the Bureau of Meteorology, to have manned weather stations, and we can be prepared. For those people who lived and survived Tracy, their experience has informed the protection that we now have. It causes great devastation and tragedy, and it is important that we learn from that experience so that our communities are protected and made safe into the future. It is also important that the spirit of compassion and looking after neighbours and our community should continue as part of the Northern Territory story. The spirit of compassion and kindness that followed Cyclone Tracy should always be remembered and should define who we are as tropical Territorians. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Johnston.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I want to start by acknowledging all the members in this chamber for who this is a very personal story, and I want to thank them for sharing those stories today. I was far away from Darwin on Christmas Eve in 1974, at home in Sydney, but our house was filled with the stories of a disaster we could not fathom. My dad, then Chief of Staff at Channel 9 News, was called into work in the middle of the night and came home sharing terrible stories that have stayed with me ever since. Over my 3 decades in Darwin, I've bunkered down through many cyclone warnings, and I remember vividly the damage caused by Marcus, but I can't imagine what it would have been like to live through those events and their aftermath. My heart goes out to everyone impacted by Cyclone Tracy, including those who are here in this chamber today. We've heard about destruction, heartbreak and loss, and also about resilience, strength, and an extraordinary community spirit. I know we all honour the memories of those who were lost and the courage of those who survived, rebuilt, and shaped the Territory into what it is today. I'd like to share some reflections from Dana, a survivor and a dear friend of mine, whose family story is currently told through an exhibition of photographs in our own Northern Territory Library here in Parliament. Her grandparents were visiting for Christmas, and her grandfather captured some amazing images both before and after the cyclone, which we're lucky enough to be able to see in this exhibition. Looking at the picture of Dana's formidable mum, Joan, with a baby on her hip in the midst of total destruction and just getting on with it, captures so much of who she is and who Darwin is. Dana told me, "I grew up with the stories and images of Cyclone Tracy and had a connection with it that brought me back to the Territory. There are so many stories of the loss to the Territory because of the cyclone, those who moved away and never came back. I reflect on the people who didn't move back, who didn't have the means, and what that might have meant for the Territory as to where we were going and what paths we were taking." Dana's words remind us that Cyclone Tracy didn't just reshape the physical landscape, it also transformed the social and cultural fabric of our community. Many who left could not return, whether by choice or circumstance, and with their departure, the Territory also lost passionate advocates, leaders and community builders. The loss of their voices also shaped the paths the Territory would take in the years that followed. Dana reflects on the experiences of her parents, strong environmentalists who rebuilt their lives elsewhere. She said, "My mum and dad would have been demonstrating on the steps of Parliament House if they were in Darwin on Tuesday, 26 November. NT's loss has been Queensland's gain in conserving the natural environment for future generations." The cyclone's impact also reached far beyond those living in Darwin, and we heard some of that from the member for Mulka. Dana also speaks of First Nations peoples whose stories remain largely untold. There must be thousands of untold stories. First Nations people who were in Darwin, many at the hospital, women having babies and then flown to places like Adelaide, far from home, while their homelands remained unscathed. Dana's words remind us that the history of Cyclone Tracy is not a single story. It's a tapestry of experiences woven together by those who stayed, those who left, and those whose voices remain unheard. And as we mark the 50th anniversary of this defining moment, let us honour the resilience of those who endured and rebuilt. And let us also reflect on the opportunities lost with those who we lost and those who could not return, and the untold stories that remain. Madam Speaker, this anniversary calls on us to remember, to listen, and to ensure that every voice, every story, and every path, taken or untaken, continues to shape our decisions into the Territory's future with the same courage and community spirit that defines our past. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Drysdale.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'd like to thank all members for their contributions today, and especially to the member for Nelson for his very moving speech this morning. Madam Speaker, I was born after Cyclone Tracy. My stepmother, Kelly Howe, lived through Cyclone Tracy, and it's on her behalf, as she's no longer with us, that I just wish to speak briefly today. I noticed when we were young the anxiety that would come around wet season, and especially with storms. And I suppose I knew she lived through Cyclone Tracy, but as a boy, it's hard to understand the gravity of what that meant. I think it's excellent that through school in the Northern Territory, we learn and remember about the event. And I remember when the museum exhibition was put up, it even made it a bit more real for us. I remembered going to that museum with my stepmom, and she couldn't go in it. It was too raw for her. And as storms would come every year, and when lightning built up, and especially when the wind picked up, there'd be, you could see that kind of come back. And so I can't imagine what that day would have been like. I think as a father and listening to the member for Nelson, it really brings home how personal these natural disasters are. When you hear about children and their presence on Christmas Day, I find that quite moving. My stepmother left with my yaya, her mum, to Melbourne, where they spent a year, and my papul stayed back to help clean up and rebuild Darwin. His story is an incredible one as well. He served in World War II. He was conscripted at the age of 14 with the Greek army, and having fled Europe, then came to Darwin, where again ravaged by Cyclone Tracy. And I wish he was around today and to learn about those events and speak to him, I guess, as a man, and understand what that is like. But it speaks to the enduring spirit, I think, that exists in all human beings, and that spirit of strength and resilience that we all share in times of trouble, and that at its core, humanity can come together when we need each other. And a chamber like this, which can be very divided on political grounds and matters of the mind. However, I think it's quite a beautiful thing to remember that when we really need each other, all those things can go to the wayside and we can just be there for each other as fellow human beings. My message would be on this 50th anniversary to all the young people, take a chance to speak to survivors, speak to those who remain, and learn yourself, in their words, learn the human side to these stories. I wish I'd done more when I was younger to learn about the events of the older people in my life. And so that would be my message today, that us younger ones just take a moment and really understand the real impact and the human impact and the good too that humanity displayed in those moments. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Nightcliff.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank the Chief Minister for bringing this motion to the House, and I thank the members for their contributions. Particularly, I want to acknowledge those in this chamber who lived through Cyclone Tracy and recognise their and their families' strength and resilience, and give my heartfelt condolences to those who passed away. Madam Speaker, it is particularly the stories of mothers, pregnant mothers, and how they must have felt trying to protect their children in such a terrifying situation that really gets me straight in my guts. I stand in awe at all the parents who held their children tight that night, and I'm devastated for the families that lost loved ones. I know that the suburbs in my electorate, Nightcliff, Rapid Creek and Coconut Grove, were hit hard. I want to acknowledge all the survivors who live in those suburbs, those who still live there, as well as the ones who had to leave and never returned. When I moved to Nightcliff, the first friend we made was a man named Bernie, who lived in a unit in our unit block. From the moment we moved in, Bernie showed us the open, friendly, helpful nature that is characteristic of old-school Territorians. It wasn't long before we were calling him Uncle Bernie to our 1-year-old. Bernie was also the first Tracy survivor that I met here. His recollections of that night have always stuck with me. He was 13 years old, in a family of 10, 2 adults and 8 kids. They were living in Jingley at the time, and he says he remembers huddling with his family as their entire upstairs blew away. They then ran to their neighbour's house, which also soon blew away, and he describes his whole family plus the second family whose house they'd run to standing behind the 2 brick walls of the supports under the elevated house that were all that was left, standing with their backs to it for protection from midnight until dawn. He described how dark it was, and you could only see in the flashes of the lightning. One flash you'd be looking at the house next door, and the next flash it would be gone. He also told me of the way the community came together, how the next day him and his siblings went to a local supermarket and the grocer told them, "Take what you need." And many others here have spoken about the way that the community came together, the camaraderie, looking out for each other, the acts of selflessness and bravery, and, of course, rebuilding. As the proverb goes, fall 7 times, stand up 8. And that's what the Territory does. Once again, I acknowledge the pain in the stories from members in this House and thank everyone for sharing their stories. I commend this motion to the House.
Member for Casuarina.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise today. Oh, sorry. Every time it happens, sorry. It's not turning on, sorry. There you go. Sorry, Madam Speaker. I'll speak after when it's turned on.
Member for Sanderson.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to make my contribution to the motion on the 50th anniversary of Cyclone Tracy. As a Minister for Museum, Arts and Libraries, I have had the honour of attending exhibitions such as Our Family Stories and heard directly from the Fitzsimmons family as they shared their recollection and images of Cyclone Tracy. Artistic interpretation of the event in Parab had me taking a very interesting journey down our migrant experience during the cyclone with the noctambulation display. There will be many events over the next few weeks that will provide opportunity for all to be reminded of the resilience and unity that binds the Territory, not just through major natural disasters, but also that has shaped our unique community spirit. A question came in this chamber yesterday why I was not present during a motion to vote on Tuesday. I went to attend the official launch of Tracy's Echo 50 Year of Resilience exhibition with the permission from the Chief Minister, where Aboriginal seniors and elders shared their powerful stories of survival, resilience and strength of culture throughout Cyclone Tracy, depicted in the works of art. Attending these thought-provoking exhibitions makes me also reflect as a husband and a father how devastating the loss would have been and how I would have protected my loved ones as much as I could and my community. As a health professional, I also contemplate what those in the community like police, paramedics, nurses and doctors would have been doing selflessly to save as many people as possible and assist those in need. No power, roads unrecognizable, cars destroyed, and a landscape spread with nothing but mountains of iron and building rubble. Tributes to the bravery and dedication of the firefighters, police officers, and volunteers, to those who operated the iceworks, to the workers who restored essential services such as power, water, and telephones, to the staff who kept hotels open as emergency billets, and to the medical personnel who provided critical care during those challenging times. The impact of the event would have been horrendous enough, but the recovery is a story of remarkable strength and resilience not worthy of commemorating today. As member for Sanderson, I want to place on records the impact of Cyclone Tracy upon the suburbs that now form the Sanderson electorate. The development of the Wargamon area predominantly occurred during the 1970s, with much of the suburb established prior to the devastation caused by Cyclone Tracy in 1974. The cyclone inflicted severe damage on the area. At the time Cyclone Tracy struck, the suburb of Anula was still under construction. A few houses had commenced construction, with only a handful completed. Following the cyclone, reconstruction efforts involved clearing the blocks that contain remnants of incomplete construction, relocating power infrastructure underground, and restarting construction activities. Before the cyclone, the majority of houses were designed in the elevated style. However, post-cyclone reconstruction predominantly featured single-story concrete dwellings. Wulagi, located in Darwin's northern suburbs, east of Lee Point Road, was developed after Cyclone Tracy, reflecting the construction and urban expansion efforts following the disaster. On Christmas Day, 1974, Cyclone Tracy devastated Darwin, causing widespread damage and loss of life. The cyclone, with winds measured at 217 km per hour before instruments failed, likely reached speeds of 300 km per hour. At least 66 people lost their lives and 650 were injured in Darwin, with more injuries treated in the state. The low casualty figures were attributed to the cyclone striking in the middle of the night. The impact of the cyclone was severe, with 70% of houses and buildings wrecked, damaged, or destroyed. First-hand accounts of individuals' experiences before, during, and after Cyclone Tracy are deeply personal. To fully comprehend the profound impact the cyclone had on residents of Darwin on 25th December 1974, it is essential to value and reflect upon these individual narratives. Such accounts, whether they involve factual details or personal recollections, collectively illuminate the unprecedented challenges encountered during this moment in history. They also serve to highlight the extraordinary resilience demonstrated by Territorians in the face of such adversity. Through these personal perspectives, we can construct a vivid and meaningful portrayal of the event and its aftermath. I take this opportunity to reflect on a small sample of some accounts. Dave Duffield, a policeman at the time, reported Cyclone Tracy hit Darwin about 1 a.m. with peaks gust 217 km per hour recorded at Darwin Airport before monitoring equipment failed. There was a 35-minute calm as the eye passed overhead about 4 a.m. The renewed fury until winds abated about 6 a.m. About 90% of Darwin's houses were wrecked, 49 people were killed, and another 16 reported missing at sea. Hundreds were wounded. The Darwin Reconstruction Commission calculated that there were approximately 8,200 houses, 3,000 flats, and 1,700 caravans and temporary dwellings in use in Darwin at the time of cyclone. Essential services such as water, sewerage, and power were contaminated and severed. The environment and food chains were disrupted, trees and gardens were disseminated, and there was widespread damage to animal habitats. A little-known disaster management process was initiated to salvage water-damaged documents from the Northern Territory. Soggy boxes were transported by RAF cargo planes to Amberley RAF base near Brisbane. From there, the records were taken to a dedicated building in Brisbane City, where Australian Archives staff sorted them. Queensland State Archives provided specialist resources, fumigating, drying, and returning the documents to Australian Archives. This operation continued for months, potentially involving treatment in Canberra as well. For many years, the people of Darwin have been encouraged to extend their gratitude to the rest of Australia for the assistance provided in the aftermath of Cyclone Tracy. Despite this, the true unsung heroes of this tragedy were the residents of Darwin themselves. The immediate national response to the disaster was critical in the rebuilding efforts. The Darwin Reconstruction Commission was promptly established, although it was somewhat inactive for the first 8 months. Major General Stretton efficiently coordinated emergency services with medical and health teams performing competently under pressure in primitive conditions. All three defense services played a vital role in the cleanup, with the RAF and naval resources, along with Navy and Army manpower, working tirelessly in the first month. The military, Port Authority, Wharfies, and municipal and essential services teams also contributed significantly to restoring the waterfront and utilities. The rebuilding of Darwin was a complex and challenging process, with significant contributions from various groups. The initial focus on planning by the Cities Commission and the Department of Regional and Urban Development aims to limit Darwin's growth was met with resistance from local residents. The DRC's early reports advocating for alternative locations for commerce and residential areas, large-scale acquisition and rebuilding, and controls on private development were seen as impractical and insensitive to the needs of the community. The appointment of Clem Jones as DRC chairman in November 1975 marked a shift in priorities, moving away from planning and towards practical reconstruction. Jones focused on improving infrastructure, making existing structures safe, and enhancing amenities. Under Jones' leadership, the DRC oversaw the implementation of over 500 contracts with an expenditure of $300 million for replacement housing, public buildings, schools, health clinics, roads, and infrastructure services. The DRC also introduced cyclone-resistant materials and adopted new national construction codes. The rebuilding of Darwin was a testament to the resilience and determination of the local community, the generosity of the Australian people, and the effective leadership of individuals like Clem Jones. The experience of Cyclone Tracy and the subsequent reconstruction efforts highlighted the importance of balancing planning with practical needs of the community and the need of timely and decisive action in the face of disaster. Key dates in the rebuilding process include March 1975, the Cities Commission releases the controversial planning options for future Darwin reports. August 1975, Grant Tampling is appointed to the Board of Darwin Reconstruction Commissioners. November 1975, Clem Jones is appointed DRC Chairman. December 1977, the Darwin Reconstruction Commission concludes its work, leaving behind a new town plan. July 1978, the Northern Territory achieves self-government. Cyclone Tracy's impact extended beyond the physical rebuilding of Darwin. The disaster also had significant social and political consequences, shaping the future of the Northern Territory and influencing the development of building codes and disaster preparedness strategies across Australia. Madam Speaker, I commend this motion.
Member for Casuarina.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and sorry for earlier. Madam Speaker, I rise today to reflect on devastating impact of Cyclone Tracy on our community, particularly the areas of Casuarina and Lee Point. While I was not here at that time, indeed I was not yet born. The stories shared by survivors, including those from my own electorate and those shared in the chamber today, vividly recount the horrors of that day. Through their words, I can feel the fear, the loss, and the incredible resilience of those who face this unimaginable tragedy. Madam Speaker, the devastation was unimaginable in what is now in Casuarina electorate. Families huddled together as their homes were torn apart. One 13-year-old survivor recalls holding to a bed frames as their elevated house collapsed around them. With only prayers and each other, they endured the storm through the freezing rain and relentless winds, eventually emerging into a dawn of complete devastation. Madam Speaker, we must not forget the absolute tragedy that this storm inflicted on us. In Nakara, the Knox family faced unimaginable loss. Michael and Eva Knox, along with their two young children, Stephen and Catherine, perished when their home was destroyed. Their story reminds us of the human cost of natural disasters and the importance of preparedness. Madam Speaker, on the harbour, Linda and John, young deckhands on prawn trawler, fought to stay alive as the waves crashed over their vessels, flooding their engine room and trapping their colleagues below the deck. Against all odds, they survived and later finding their boat washed ashore at Solway. Madam Speaker, in Casuarina, elevated homes were ripped apart, leaving families clinging to floorboards. One resident described huddling with their children under the makeshift shelter as their roof was torn away. The morning revealed a wasteland where their vibrant street once stood. Only house still markets what had been their community. Madam Speaker, at the Lee Point, the scene was no less devastating. The one lush canopies of tropical trees were stripped bare, the roots exposed, lying like broken matchsticks. Birds that once filled the air with their calls had vanished. Their nests were destroyed. A fisherman recalled walking along the beach at dawn and finding debris scattered as far as the eye could see. Even the mangroves, which had stood for centuries as a natural shield, were battered and broken. But Madam Speaker, nature has incredible ability to heal, and so does our community. Over the decades, Lee Point has seen the slow but steady return of life. Trees have regrown and birds have come back to the nest. Families in Casuarina rebuild their homes, and their streets once again echo with laughter of children. Madam Speaker, while I was not there to personally witness the devastation firsthand, the stories of survivors and their extraordinary resilience have left an undeniable mark on me. Their experiences remind us the incredible strength of Territorians, their determinations to rebuild, to protect their community, and to never lose hope. Madam Speaker, as we commemorate 50 years since that fateful day, let's respect and honor the memory of those we lost and celebrate the resilience of those who survived. Let us continue to learn from their experiences and build a future that is safer, stronger, and united. I would like to thank all Territorians who came back and rebuilt. And thank you all members sharing your personal stories with us today. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Khoda.
Is there any chance we adjourn 1 minute early, or will I just go the first 30 words?
Look, you've probably got 90 seconds.
All right, we'll give it a go. Madam Speaker, I know there are some people it can be hard for to understand why Cyclone Tracy is such an important part of the people of the Northern Territory's collective psyche. I've been told by many that this was the first event that they remember as their earliest memory due to the chaos and the trauma it inflicted. Madam Speaker, this may not come as a surprise to some of those in this chamber, but I was not in Darwin on that fateful Christmas Eve 50 years ago. My parents were not here either, as they had not but yet been fortunate enough to move to the Territory and did not have to grow up here in the best place in the world. However, I have learnt about the tragedy of Cyclone Tracy through my friends and their experiences, especially their parents, teachers at school, my colleagues, and those that have shared their experiences with the world. Madam Speaker, I find it useful on matters such as these to listen and look at those who went through these ideals and remind myself that the people who survived this and those who lost their lives were human beings with their own dreams, thoughts and ambitions. These people who survived the ordeal of one of the worst storms in the history were often unaware of the dangers looming, and in dealing with the losses and destruction of the storm, they picked themselves up and they rebuilt this city that we stand in today. I know this topic is difficult for many survivors, but it is important to remember a significant part of our shared history and the history of Darwin and the Territory.
Member for Khoda, your time has expired. Thank you for attempting to fill in that time.